Minister, why has the government supported this one-day Senate inquiry into the stimulus package?
It's a natural flow-on from the way that the package actually got through the Parliament in the first place, and we formed the view that it was reasonable for Mr Henry to explain further to the Senate how things are going. I indicated on radio yesterday that it's not an automatic thing that public servants like Mr Henry can just be called before the Senate whenever the Senate feels like it, but there are established processes where that occurs, so we don't think it's unreasonable for him and anybody else who may be directly relevant in the Treasury, for that matter, to explain how things are going.
What about anybody else outside the Treasury? I'm thinking here of Reserve Bank Governor Glenn Stevens, because Family First Senator Stephen Fielding says for him to vote for this inquiry, he wants the Reserve Bank Governor to front it.
Fran, I'm not an expert in these things, but I don't believe we've got the ability to decide for Glenn Stevens whether or not he should appear before a parliamentary committee. We certainly are in the decision-maker's seat with respect to public servants who follow instructions from the government, but I think it's a very different matter for the Reserve Bank Governor. I think that's his decision.
It seems we do need to have an inquiry into how the billions are being spent. The Australian Financial Review today has a breakdown on the Community Infrastructure Program, which was one of the stimulus programs, saying the cash has gone disproportionately to Labor marginal seats.
Well,
Is that what's gone on?
Well, we don't accept that at all, Fran. If you look at the spread of figures that I've been provided with, something like 53% of the spending goes in Labor-held seats, and we hold 55% of the seats. So it's pretty much bang on the proportion of the representation in Parliament, as I understand. Now, I haven't had a chance to fully read that newspaper article or indeed to dig into what is being suggested there, but certainly that spread of spending, I think, does tell a story.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples in the Fin Review. In your home state of Victoria, the AFR analysis says Labor seats received $100 million compared with $57 million for coalition seats.
Well, that just doesn't tally with the total picture that I've been provided with, Fran, which is that you've got about 53% of overall spending in the program going to Labor seats. Now, there'll probably be some variations between states. Keep in mind that the nature of the program is such that it's going to have more relevance in certain parts of Australia than others. So, sadly, my seat, being an inner city seat that's relatively small and very much built up and so forth, amongst other things, there's not that many places where you can build new infrastructure. There are other areas like the growth corridors, for example, where there is huge demand for new infrastructure, and inevitably there's going to be a higher investment there on balance. So there'll be variations around the country.
If we're talking about growth corridors, you'd think in New South Wales then coalition seats might be up for some money, wouldn't you? Yet these figures show that 26 out of 28 Labor seats in New South Wales won money, compared with 10 of the 19 coalition-held seats.
Well, again, Fran, I'm not across the detail in the article, and I don't know whether that's an accurate reflection of the total program. All I can indicate to you again is that 53% of the spending in the program went to Labor-held seats, and we hold 55% of the seats.
Perhaps it's a matter of, though, which seats and which are marginal or not. Malcolm Turnbull's already dubbed this Ros Kelly's whiteboard all over again, a reference to the Sports Rorts affair.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull's a drowning man. He's a desperate opposition leader who's opposed this package. He's opposed all efforts by the government to stimulate economic activity in the face of the global recession. Now he's thrashing around for every nitpicking opportunity he can find in order to justify his opposition to building community infrastructure, to renovating our schools, to insulating our homes, to building new road, rail and port infrastructure, and providing cash payments that have helped to stimulate the retail sector and keep thousands upon thousands of people in jobs. So he's made a bad political call to oppose the government's economic strategy. Now he's thrashing around for any excuse he can find to justify that bad decision.
Lindsay Tanner, as Finance Minister, it's your job to crack down on wasteful spending. You can't be happy with some of the building upgrades that have been approved in the schools program. The $250,000 for a new library for a one-pupil school near Longreach. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, I'm not aware of the detail of this, Fran, and
you should be, shouldn't you,
by
now?
Well, it's only been raised yesterday, and I haven't had an opportunity to look at it in detail. But one of the things I have learned over the past few months is that there's usually a lot more to the eye that meets the eye when you dig into some of these individual stories. Usually there's a school amalgamation, for example, it's planned so that the location that's involved will ultimately become part of a larger school, for example. So you just need to be very careful in interpreting these things, because we've seen, for instance, the opposition raise a claim that a school with 5 pupils was getting $250,000, and then they very quickly retreated and said, no, actually, theoretically, they could apply for that. So you just need to be very careful in examining any of these things to make sure that you're not being given a misleading presentation of the facts.
Well, has there been wasteful spending in the stimulus rollout?
But we've acknowledged there's always going to be some hiccups with a program of this scale that has to be rolled out very quickly. Keep in mind the purpose of it was just to get activity up and running, to get money moving into the economy, to sustain the construction sector and all the things that hang off that in particular, but also to leave a very important legacy of education infrastructure for future generations. When you do that very quickly, as we've had to do, there's always going to be the odd difficulty here and there. We're dealing through state education systems and independent school education systems, so we're not completely in control of how things unfold on the ground. There's always going to be those odd difficulties, but I don't believe that the picture that's been portrayed by sections of the media and indeed by the opposition is an accurate one, and I believe the program is entirely worthwhile and justified, and it's great for our primary education system, and also it's been critical to helping keeping the economy growing when every other economy of any significance around the world has basically been going backwards big time.
And the signs are it is growing. Good news on the jobs front yesterday with a 4% rise in job ads last month. That's the first increase since April last year. Today, a Dun & Bradstreet survey shows investment plans are the highest in 2 years. That's business investment plans. And half of the employers surveyed expect an increase in sales. Isn't the picture now showing pretty clearly that business is starting to stimulate itself and it's not going to need the government money?
I think it's too early to make that call, Fran. The Treasury analysis suggests that the 0.6% increase in economic activity over the last quarter that the national accounts have just shown would have been a minus 0.3%, a reduction, had there been no stimulus strategy. So even with better news than was perhaps expected, we're still in for a period where growth is going to be, frankly, pretty ordinary, and where the downward pressures on our economy from international forces, including the big drops in prices for our exports like iron ore, are going to have a very major effect on Australia's economy. So it's important that over the next year or so, you've still got that stimulatory impact from the government's initiatives helping to keep growth in the positive. Without it, we would be in technical recession now, and hundreds of thousands of people who've still got jobs wouldn't have them, and thousands of businesses that are still open wouldn't be.
So we will have the kind of strange situation where the government will still be putting in stimulus spending and the Reserve Bank will almost certainly putting up rates to slow things down. The Reserve Bank governor has spoken about interest rates sooner or later returning to normal, and the government's talked about this too. What is normal? What would a normal household borrower consider normal interest rates to be?
Well, as you know, friend, we don't speculate on interest rate movements, and there's been a fair bit of breathless commentary about the Reserve Bank governor's comment, where he was simply pointing out that when you have interest rates at an emergency level, is how he's described them, drop to 50-year lows, it's unrealistic to assume that that's where they're going to stay indefinitely. Contrary to some indications, he hasn't indicated that interest rates are likely to rise next week or next month or any particular time. He's just pointed to what is essentially fairly obvious, and that is that they are not going to stay at this ultra-low level forever. People have leapt ahead of that and then started to assume that interest rates are about to rise. Now, we won't speculate on whether or not that's the case. So I've just pointed out yesterday.
Even the Prime Minister suggested they're going to rise. He's warned us.
No, I won't speculate. He hasn't speculated on when that might be. So he's essentially made the same observation as the Reserve Bank governor and the same observation that I'm making. The trouble is the media, of course, is not interested in a story about hypothetically what might occur sometime into the future. They're interested in something that might happen tomorrow, and a speculation about something that might happen long-term into the future or could happen who knows when has been turned into interest rates about to rise story. And all I've done yesterday is point out that is not what the Reserve Bank governor has said.
Do you think we're too obsessed with interest rates?
No, I don't necessarily think so. I think that there's millions of ordinary working people out there who depend very much on where interest rates head, and if interest rates go up, that hurts them. So I don't believe that the media is too obsessed with interest rates, or indeed the politicians, government. They're critical to the well-being of millions of families out there, millions of people. But I think we need to keep in perspective the speculation about where they might head.